Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult, video number 249, Death Cults, Plague Cults, and the like. You'd like to think that they don't exist, but they do. Sometimes they're tied with more authentic sort of criminal and terroristic behavior. We'll get into a little bit of everything here. First is the preface. I wanted to talk about Corona-chan and the sort of mimetic egregore floating around on the internet, of course spawned by 4chan. Spawned as itself a sort of occult disease agent of sorts, taking off of Ebola-chan, that idea loosely. You'll remember that years and years ago with the West African Ebola outbreak, there was a half-joking suggestion that the occult was involved, and attempts were actively made to convince people that there was a death worship cult that had taken hold inside of the medical apparatus to try to get people to avoid treatment. It was sort of a slightly sick joke. I think actually one newspaper in Nigeria, I believe, ran with it as though it was serious, and it was at that point that a lot of people stopped shitposting about it because they realized they were creating something a bit too real. The idea of death worship within the occult, of disease worship specifically. There's a deity from ancient times within paganism, Babylonian, I believe, called Nergal. Now Nergal from Warhammer, that particular franchise, is a spin-off of this primordial being, and was the god of inflicted death, disease, and things of that nature. Most of the pagan pantheons had one or more disease-carrying gods. Of course, even the good ones could give you a disease, but then they could be placated. They could also cure them. There were always some, though, that were just specifically pernicious, specifically obsessed with the idea of rot and decay and corpses and stuff. And I don't mean in the Plutonian sense of simply reigning over the world of the dead. I mean inflicting death and attempting actively to cause people harm. We see the counterpart, ironically enough, in Judaism come from a combination of the devil and God himself. Within the Judaistic context, if you read the Book of Lot, who's causing Job to be covered with sores and cancerous boils and tumors and so forth? Well, it's Jehovah, acting through Satan, who is ultimately no more than his emissary, specifically with the idea that by tempting people with bad times, if they are indeed worthy of being put through the ringer, and of course the daughters and sons all get killed or raped or whatever, but Job, in the end, he ends up doing quite well. His wealth is restored because he refuses to repudiate Jehovah. And so, he worships through a face full of tumors, and he ends up, getting wealthier. And then he has more daughters. Hopefully these ones didn't get carried off by Philistines. And this carries over into a Christian context, the idea of Satan causing disease. However, it's really the God that's doing that. The source of power is clearly not Satan in and of himself within that particular system. We have actual examples, though, where death, to an extent, has been worshipped throughout time. And I don't mean in the primitive sense. You have some uncontacted tribe that worships skulls. This seems like death worship until you realize it's usually ancestral in nature. You look at Catalhoyuk, one of the earliest sort of proto-cities that we can say had a decent population. The ancestral remains were buried under herds and under altars and so forth within Catalhoyuk, and they were apparently removed, cleaned, venerated in some way. We're not exactly sure about all of the ins and outs of the ritualism. But there was a central place for the remains of the dead. It might have caused their demise due to disease or rodent infestation, feasting on those mummified remains. I'm sure that was very cleanly. So we've had that. It would look like death worship, but it's probably not. It's probably ancestor worship. The fact is that the closest thing to the ancestor is simply the skeleton or the remains that have been left behind. Later on, we get a transference of religion. Usually items owned by the dead would be venerated, like the staff of a saint. Normally, people no longer worship the dead body of a saint, but the Catholic Church continues its interest in holy relics of other types. You still have like that one vial that they claim miraculously becomes blood, even though it's probably a chemical reaction, stuff like that. You do have some people, even if it's uncommon, there are some people who genuinely, I think, are bored nihilistic enough at this point. They look at the world around them and see enough decadence that they're like, fucking let it collapse, at least it'll be exciting. They want an end-time style scenario, and this has been common, by the way, in mainline religion. There is an element of fanaticism around the end times that we saw not that long ago. In popular culture in the 2000s, every other History Channel show was about doomsday. through 2012, everyone was talking about Mayan doomsday. It's an exciting topic for people because people have a tendency to look at the world around them and think it's fallen. They have a tendency to rank the world as being more poorly off than it really is, especially if they're in a Western culture where generally things are pretty boring. By historical standards, 200 years ago, the average person got up at the crack of dawn, they went out to work, and they thought there were witches and dragons and shit out in the forest, which was vast and hadn't seen an axe yet. And that was the norm for much of human society for thousands and thousands of years. Now we're in a situation where for the average person, they get up and they go to an office. They're on a paved road all day. They're never in wilderness. They wouldn't know how to function. Their food comes in a can, so to speak. It's a little bit trying, I think, for the human psyche. There's a reason why we have gone collectively mad over the last century or so, certainly to a lesser extent since industrialization. Even since the finding of the New World, the second that we fill in all of the empty land, things start getting weird now, doesn't it? Death worship, therefore, to an extent, is just a reaction to that decadence. I see it, by the way, not as an intrinsically negative thing. So when I see people trying to spread coronavirus by spreading Corona Chan, there is a psychological element that becomes a little bit cultish, even if it's just in an online context. What happens is that people look at that, they find it funny at first. They're like, haha, these people are worshiping a disease. Haha, it's pretty funny. In order to troll, they start doing the same, and they sort of work themselves up a little bit into a fury. They sort of work it into their own brains. They're almost brainwashing themselves. The memes have become infection agents after a fashion. This happened with Ebola Chan, and you're not resistant to it. Trust me, if you encounter it frequently enough. It goes right along with the disease. Now, of course, this time it's infecting enough people, so this will probably be a sort of a staying power style mimetic thing, an egregore, if you will. For instance, I believe that to an extent, if not fate, I don't really believe in fate. I believe that the odds of various outcomes can be affected by collective will, through the butterfly effect if you wish to rationalize it. Yes, I believe that changes to people's behavior, to their minds, have a wider effect upon the world. We don't fully understand how things operate. We may in the future. It could be that science can quantify it. It could be that it's kind of beyond our physical capabilities. We'll see. I believe that generally speaking, things are a lot more spooky than people at first believe. What was that one dude who said that at the first sip of physics you become an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass God is waiting, or something along those lines? I can believe it. Once a person wrestles with enough paradoxes, probably like, what the fuck is going on here? And they think that we're living in the Matrix. Doesn't make me a theist, but it does make me have a wider appreciation for the spiritual. And death worship has been around for a while, in various forms. Again, partially we're talking about dead remains. It's not a worship of death as a concept. It's just the veneration of remains, or of the power of nature to kill. It can be nature worship as well. Or even the productive aspect. The generative aspect and killing go hand in hand. Dream interpretation is a great example. If you dream of death, universally within pre-modern dream interpretation, to dream of death is to dream of, the symbology actually represents birth and marriage, having children or getting into a relationship. Vice versa, if you dream of marriage, it's like dreaming of your own death, or an impending death in the family, depending on which oracle you consult, which dream interpretation guide. The idea was that these two things were juxtaposed, and I have a feeling that some of that's sarcasm. Like the idea that the dude sort of dies to his friends or his old life when he gets married. It might have been a little bit of a sexist aside, but I don't really think so. I think that might be a postmodern interpretation seeping in there. So yeah, there is death worship. Some of these people genuinely do. I've read manuscripts from actual cults, including some that are vaguely criminal in nature, including one that the person begged me to delete it afterwards and claimed to have gone crazy. There's some weirdness in the occult literary world that happens once in a while that I've been part of because, people have sent me books and manuscripts and shit. And some of it venerates the idea of the end times. Even physically attempting to bring about death and harm is considered to be something that's, venerated or at least tolerable in some of these systems. You get this more with, I think, chaos magic of the darker kind. You get it with some groups that do believe, for sometimes quasi-political reasons, that the world is decadent and must be essentially destabilized. That nuclear war would be the best thing for us, really. That it would bring about a better world. I suppose you can interpret the world as that decadent. I remain a little bit more hopeful. It's easier when you have a garden. Yeah, trust me, balances things out more. You can grow your fucking radishes. It's difficult to be unhappy when you see the size of your cabbages. That's about all. Peace out.